All right, want me to kick it off?
Yeah.
All right, well, hey, welcome everyone. Good morning here out in LA. Want to thank everyone for coming this morning and joining us for our second session on the fundamentals of sustainability directed for elementary school children. My name is Ryan Tinus. I work in commercial real estate for a company called Hudson Pacific Properties. And I work in sustainability on the engineering side. So I really focus on energy and water reductions and really trying to make our buildings as efficient as possible. Kanika, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kanika Sharma. I am an architect by background, but currently I work with an engineering company called Integral Group. And I work a lot with engineers to design energy efficient systems and get my design thinking cap on to integrate that engineering side of things with the architecture of the building to make the building look beautiful also. So I'm gonna jump over to water.
Excellent. So the first session, we really focused on climate change and air quality and energy. So for this session, we're going to focus on water and waste, and then sort of green transportation and how that translates into green schools. So kind of starting here, let's talk a little bit about water. I think we really need to remember that we don't have an unlimited supply of water. Water is very important for the environment and for nature to be happy. Water comes from the rain that comes down, that feeds the animals and plants to keep us alive and well on Earth here. So while it wouldn't be probably the obvious when you think about it, when you look around, there's a lot of water on the Earth. Almost 70 to 75% of the Earth is covered in water. So we wouldn't necessarily think that it's a very limited resource. However, with all this water around it, most of it's unusable for humans and animals because almost all of the Earth's water, almost 97.5%, is in the ocean. It's salt water that can't be drunk by humans or animals or used to nurture plants. So only 2.5% of the Earth's water is fresh water that we can actually use. And of that, almost all of it, nearly 70% of it's frozen in the ice caps. So really only 30% of the water that is fresh water can we use to sustain life here. And of that, only about 1% of it's available to be used because of polluted water. So when you kind of trickle all of that down, only 0.0% of all of the water that's on the Earth can actually be used for humans and plants, and the water that we use, kind of the potable water that we have around us. So, next slide. With that small amount of water, it's really important for us to think about and conserving as much as we can. So, the next slide. It's really important for us to take a look and think about all the ways we use water and trying to limit that so that we have enough for all of us to go forward. So when you think about all the water that we use on a daily basis, how do we really use that? We use it to, go back, please.
Sorry.
We use it to kind of cook water. We use it to cook. We use it to water our lawns. We use it to take baths and showers. We use it to wash our clothes, and we use it to drink. We give it to our pets. So, next slide. With so many uses for water, it's really important for us to save as much as possible so we have enough for everybody. This really brings up a concept called conservation. And conservation means that we're not using something just because we want to, we're using less of it so we keep it around so that we can protect the Earth. So not using as much water has been one of the main ways that we've tried to protect all the water on the planet. And here are some great ways that we can conserve water around the house. So for instance, when you're doing your laundry, you can set your machine to the shortest cycle possible so that you're using less water to clean your clothes. You can also buy more efficient washing machines that use less water to be able to clean the clothes just the same way as they would. And you also should really only run the washing machine whenever it's full. So if you run the machine less often, you're using less water. And some ways you can save water in the bathroom would be to take shorter showers, fix any leaks that you have. For instance, your shower head, or if your toilet has a leak, it's really important to fix that so that we're using less water. And also think about, how long it takes when you're running the water to heat up your shower. So, you're using, 2 gallons of water every minute. That adds up. So if you're running it extra long, that's wasting water. And then some ways that you can actually save water at home in the kitchen would be when you're washing your dishes, for instance, fill up the sink and use a, 1 bowl of soapy water versus running the faucet nonstop. In the same way, if you have a dishwasher, make sure that it's loaded fully before you run it. And then also making sure to scrape off your dishes so you're not just rinsing them under water. And another great way, and we'll talk about this a little more in the waste section, is to compost the waste so that you don't have to run it down your sink, you're not running your disposal. These are some great ways that you can save water inside your house on a daily basis. So next slide.
I just want to add a couple of ways in which I try to save water. And I'm sure like you all too, when you wash your vegetables or you wash your car, so washing vegetables, it's very easy for you to just collect some water in a bowl and rinse your vegetables there, and then use that water to then water your plants outside. Another way, when you are washing your car, instead of using like a hose to wash down your car, use a bucket, and use that will help you conserve water. And then another way in which I found that I've been saving a lot of water is when I wait for the water when I turn on the tap and it's cold water running and I want hot water in my tap, I basically collect all of the cold water first in a bowl. And then when it gets to that hot water, I use that hot water, and the water that I've collected, I just use that to, again, plant the plants outside or in my indoor plants that I have in the house.
That's excellent. One of the ways my son tries to save water is by not brushing his teeth, and that's not a good way to save water. So just want to run the water less. That's important, right? And using a cup to collect the water to drink instead of just running the faucet, right? So some great ways to save water around the house. One
quick way that we just did in our house is, so we had old taps in our house, which used to have a really high flow rate of water. So we just bought $2 aerators from Home Depot. So ask your parents to get that if they can, and then just fix that to your tap. And that ends up saving so much water. So when you're washing your hands or brushing your teeth, you will end up saving so much water just by having an aerator on your tap.
Those are all great ways to save water when you're home. But we also use a lot of water outdoors, right? So, this here is what's called an irrigation system, and it's used to water crops for the food that we end up eating. So farmers grow these crops to serve all sorts of human needs that, you can use for food, or sometimes you can grow things like cotton that become your clothes. And pretty much, all of the fresh food that you see in a grocery store comes from a farm. So we can either get our food from a small farm that sells locally at a farmer's market, or it can be grown far away and shipped to places like your grocery store. So when you go to a big grocery store, most of that food's coming from an industrial agriculture or a big farm. So that means they're very, very big and they feed a lot of people all over the world. But to do that takes a lot of water. So industrial agriculture is a significant source of outdoor water use. In fact, in the United States, almost 20% of all the water that's used by humans and removed from rivers and groundwater is used for this industrial agriculture. So just to grow the food that we need to live. And on the next slide, you can see here that people also use a lot of water outdoor at your home. So we've got a couple people on the Zoom here. I'm going to try and maybe let's try to get some engagement here. So what are some ways that maybe you use water outside of your home? Anybody want to put into the chat some ways that they use water besides drinking?
You can either unmute yourself or put your answer in the chat. Guess while people put their answers, we can keep going.
Yeah, got a shy group today, no problem. So, what we see here is kind of two homes right next to each other. And, one big use of water in your home actually is for watering your lawn, right? So, you've got to take a bunch of water and run it through a sprinkler, which could be inefficient. You've got a hose, which may potentially leak, all just to water the grass that's in front of your home. But so, the house on the left is using a lot of water to get the greenery around it. But there are other ways to landscape your house, right? So a more efficient way to do it would be the house on the right, where, it doesn't take a lot of water. So, the idea is to use native plants and landscaping, that can take advantage of the local conditions. So instead of putting in turf grass that takes a lot of water, you put plants that are used to the environment that you live in. So it doesn't take as much water and it doesn't erode the soil. It's actually cheaper to maintain because the plants are used to growing in the environment that you're in. So, for instance, if you live in a desert, using native shrubs and cactus instead of grass is a great way to save water. But if you are going to irrigate your lawn, and sometimes, you need to water your plants, even if they're native, you want to try and really do that watering early in the morning or later in the evening to reduce the water use so it doesn't just evaporate up. And another strategy you can use is something called drip irrigation. So on the left, you see the sprinkler just kind of shooting water everywhere. On the right, you wouldn't even see drip irrigation because it's actually down in the soil and it's just directly dropping water right at the plant level. So it's getting absorbed and it's able to be much less wasteful because the water is going exactly where you need. So you don't even need to put as much of it. So by using native plants and better irrigation, you can really save a lot of water. So, really, on the next slide, we're going to talk about, why is it so important to conserve this water, right? So we have a lot of people who live in California, especially down here in the South, but we don't get a lot of rain in Los Angeles. It's actually one of the reasons why I moved to LA, because the weather's pretty good. But that means that, it's a very dry climate. And, as we talked about in the first session with kind of climate change, these areas are continuing to get drier. And we're seeing longer droughts throughout the U.S. So, this is causing problems for everywhere. So, for instance, here in California, we share a lot of water with Arizona and Nevada. There's a lot of people trying to drink water and also for the farmlands. But we all get our water, from the same reservoir here. And, this is a problem because we haven't been getting enough rain to refill this up. So, think of like a bathtub, right? Like once you fill your bathtub up with water and it starts to drain out, once it's empty, there's no more water. So you really need to be careful not to use too much water because it's going to run out. And, this is really important because, again, there's 20 million people who are getting their water from this reservoir and people use a lot of water. So, each person in Los Angeles uses almost 90 gallons of water a day, although you really only drink about a gallon of it or less. So most of that water is being used for things that you don't need to necessarily be using so much water for. And that's why it's important, to try and do things every day that you can conserve water and use less, because you only need, about a gallon of water a day to really sustain your life. So again, there's some really cost-effective ways to conserve water, like turning off water while you brush your teeth, taking shorter showers, again, kind of putting those aerators on or making sure you're not leaking water out of your faucets. And then again, reducing outdoor irrigation. But one of the most important things you can do is educating yourself and your community, going through and taking courses like this so you can really, understand the impact and figure out ways to use less. Next slide, please.
I want to add to that one thing.
Yeah.
One thing that you could do, a fun exercise would be when you receive your water bill the next time, just calculate how much water you use per day, just to see like how do you compare with the 90 gallons of water per day that Ryan just mentioned. Do you use less water than that or more water? And if you do end up using more water, then how can you incorporate some of the strategies that Ryan talked about to reduce your water consumption?
And you can really make a game out of it, right? Like how can you use less and less, and how can you show that and really calculate how much less water you're using? It's a really great way to pay attention to that, Kanika. Thank you. The other real issue with water comes from pollution. So, pollution is anything that is chemical, physical, or biological that impacts the quality of the water and may be harmful for living things that use it. So, water pollution can come from like factories dumping waste directly into the water, or we talked about fossil fuels in the last session. But if there's oil spills or any leaks from the drilling of those fossil fuels, that gets into the water. But also like runoff from the streets. So if you think of any oil or chemicals that get fallen in the streets or garbage, when it rains, that can wash that water directly into the waterways, and that creates the water pollution. And on the next slide, you can really see how bad water pollution is, because it can sicken and even kill animals, shellfish, things that live in the water, birds, anything that eats those fish. And it can also cause really serious illness to humans who either eat those animals or fish, but also, for swimming in the water or being around it, or if you try and drink the water. These are all really bad things that happen when the water supply gets polluted, because water is so integral to sustain the life that we have here. So it's really critical to use less water, but then also to make sure that we're not polluting the water that we have, so that we have as much fresh water to sustain life that we need going forward. Do you have any other thoughts on water here, Kanika, before we move on to recycling?
Just wanted to add, so when we think about water pollution, don't just think about it from the perspective of like drinking water. If the water is polluted and we use that water to irrigate our crops and plants, that water is ultimately going to enter our food chain as well, and you're going to be severely affected by that water. There are so many countries where they don't have clean supply of water, and the population suffers a lot because the instant, like you can get diarrhea, you can get all sorts of diseases, and they can be pretty deadly. So how can you ensure that you advocate also for the people who are managing the water systems to make sure that when they are releasing this water into the rivers, like they are also making sure that the water is clean, so that the fishes don't get hurt, the animals don't get hurt, and you don't get hurt from consumption of that water through your food chain.
Excellent, great, thank you. So, I think you did a really good job of highlighting exactly why water is so important, right? It really sustains everything we do, and it's not just the water we drink, but the water that goes and impacts the plants and animals, the food we grow, all very important parts here. Again, just highlighting the fact that water is such a limited resource. Even though the earth is completely covered in water, most of it's water that we can't use to do what we need to do.
So the next time you turn on your tap, just think of how far that water has traveled to come to you, because we get our water from the Colorado River, the reservoir. It has traveled so much distance to get to your tap.
Excellent. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about waste in the garbage and sort of how that impacts the environment around us. So, there are really two kinds of waste that we're going to talk about today. The first is, kind of waste that goes into a garbage bin that ends up in a landfill, and the other is recyclable waste, things that can be used again and again. So things like paper and plastic and aluminum cans and glass, once you're done using them, you can actually take them back to a plant and grind them up and reuse them into those items again. So you can keep using them again and again and again. So the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens to the waste that isn't recycled. So municipal waste is the garbage or trash that really gets thrown away. So you think of things like wrappers and packaging, or even your grass clipping, old furniture, bottles, clothes, food scraps, newspapers, appliances, basically anything that's not composted or recycled is considered municipal waste. Where does that waste all go? I mean, it ends up, ultimately, you put it in your garbage can, you put it, which ends up, kind of out on the street, and it's picked up by a garbage truck, and it ultimately ends up in a landfill. So on the next slide, I can talk about, some of the problems that come along with holding all of our garbage in a landfill. So first, the dirt and the soil in the landfill can absorb some of the harmful chemicals that might be in the trash. And that gets spread into the ground and the groundwater, which pollutes the water and really contaminates a much larger area than just the landfill itself. Also, landfills release gases into the air. And remember when we were talking about carbon dioxide and methane and how those contribute to global warming? Well, this is one place where a lot of those gases can come from. So those gases come up in the air, they trap the heat, which really contributes to the greenhouse effect. And in addition to that, landfills are big piles of garbage. So, that garbage can get blown away. It can litter the neighborhoods that we live in. It also provides breeding grounds for animals, things like vermin, like rats and mice that, eat the food scraps that are in there. And then they can also end up, carrying diseases or causing other problems to the people who live around the landfills. So, this is what happens when we sort of pile all our waste together in a landfill. We can have some really negative effects here. So, what's the alternative to putting things into a landfill? On the next slide, we're going to kind of talk about this concept of zero waste. So, instead of buying everything and putting it into a landfill, the goal here is really to limit the amount of waste that goes into a landfill. And we do that using, kind of this concept of the 3 R's. So, the first goal is to reduce. So reduce the amount of garbage that is being introduced into what you do, right? So for instance, if you go to the grocery store and instead of getting a plastic bag that you're going to come home and have to throw away, use a reusable bag, use a cloth bag, so that you're reducing the amount of garbage that you're actually bringing into your house. The next best thing you can do is reuse the materials you have instead of purchasing new. So, for instance, if you do bring a plastic bag home, instead of, just throwing it away, you can reuse it over and over and over again. So, again, you're using less materials, which then ultimately have to end up in the garbage. And then the third thing, after you reduce, so bringing less garbage in your home, reusing everything you can, would be to recycle what you have. So making sure that any products that are recyclable, things like paper, plastic, cardboard, glass, metal cans, putting those into a recycle bin so they can ultimately go and be reused. And then after you've done all that, throw away what's left. And, if you're reducing, reusing, and recycling, ultimately, you should be throwing away a very little amount. And that's the goal. And really the concept behind zero waste is really minimizing anything that you're going to be throwing away in the landfill as much as possible. And the other thing to think about is that when you reduce the amount of materials that you're using, you're ultimately saving energy because you don't have to make those things in the first place. So every plastic bag that, doesn't get made is saving energy, it's saving oil. So these are really important to, not only from a waste perspective, but from an overall environmental perspective, doing a lot of good by reducing what you're actually using and consuming and then throwing away. Because think of all the energy that goes into making a product that ends up in the landfill. You want to avoid that as much as possible. Do you have any tips, Kanika, about ways that maybe you reduce or reuse or recycle in your home and your life?
I like to add another R in front of reduce, which I say refuse. So even before like you get to that point, just like refuse, just absolutely refuse that I'm not going to use plastic bags at all. So the next time your parents go grocery shopping or you go grocery shopping, just carry those bags with you. And even if they are offering you these plastic bags to carry your groceries, just refuse those bags and say that, I'm going to make sure that I'm using these reusable bags, and that's what I'm going to shop my groceries in. There are some grocery stores which also allow you to carry your own mason jars if you are buying items in bulk. So that's another way that you can reduce the consumption of those thin plastic bags that are really hard to recycle also. So there are plenty of ways that you can start to like slowly incorporate in your lifestyle, in your day to day, and ask your parents like what do they do to reduce some of the waste that's been generated, and have a conversation with them and think of innovative ways in which you could start to reduce the overall waste that your entire house generates. So not just you, but your parents and your siblings and like all of your uncles and aunts. So try to engage them in this conversation and make a game out of this too. It's just a fun way to reduce your environmental impact.
Excellent. And on the next slide here, we see another way that we can really reduce our environmental impact when it comes to waste through composting, right? So, compost is it's a wonderful recycling facility, like right in your own home. So, food scraps don't need to go into the landfill anymore because you can use it in your garden as organic matter, right? So you collect up all of these organic matter, or things that used to be alive, I think your food and even paper, right? That used to be a tree. So you can get these together, and as they decay and break down, they turn into like this healthy fertilizer that you can use in your garden. So, if you live near a farmer's market or a community garden, they may want your compost, or you can use it at home to, to grow some beautiful flowers. I mean, everything that kind of grows in the earth loves it, right? So compost works with kind of all the tiny microorganisms living with it, around it, to kind of keep your soil healthy, and it makes these nutrients readily available for the plants that grow in the soil. It really also helps with climate change because we're able to put our waste back into the earth and grow things naturally rather than have to pile it up in the landfill, where you have all the problems that kind of come along with that, that we talked about, kind of the municipal waste that ends up in the landfill. And then on the next slide, we can kind of see that, the way that, cities as a whole, really help facilitate and help, drive reducing waste by adopting sort of zero waste policies. They have kind of comprehensive recycling programs. They have, citywide composting programs. They have reuse programs, so you can donate materials that can be used elsewhere, so they don't end up in the landfill. They get to be repurposed for their usefulness. So, one great example of this is in San Francisco up north. It was the first major city in the United States to ban the use of plastic bags those bags you were talking about, Kanika. So they take a long time to degrade in a landfill, and a lot of times they just end up as litter kind of blowing around on the streets. So they were the first city to kind of tackle that refuse that you were talking about by not even allowing them in the first place. And they also, San Francisco has a mandatory recycling program, which, they're able to divert, 77% of the materials that they have in their garbage ends up actually being recycled, and it ends up staying out of the landfill. So this picture kind of shows a typical San Francisco scene, kind of miniaturized, but it was made from recycled materials for a special exhibit at the Conservatory of Flowers in their San Francisco's, Golden Gate Park. It's one of the most prized public spaces in the park. So, everything that you do at home, cities are trying to help, create policies to kind of have everybody do these things, so that we can really, accomplish a more waste-free future. You have any kind of thoughts or tips around that, Kanika?
I just want to live in a future where waste does not exist. There is no waste. Everything is either recycled or upcycled, which is it is being used to make better things than so a plastic bag doesn't exist. So I would urge you all to, when you start to think about like what you want to do in the future, think about the ways in which you can get involved with sustainability ideas, and how would you create a future where waste does not exist? What would that look like? Imagine how awesome that would be. You won't even have to like take your trash bins outside every Friday. Like, imagine how much time you save.
Well, yeah, and then you're not driving around in the garbage trucks, right? I mean, it just keeps,
Yeah.
it keeps, building upon, the benefits. So,
Yeah,
great. And speaking of driving, you want to take over and talk a little bit about green transportation?
absolutely. So there is something seriously wrong with this picture, but we are all too familiar with this. What do you think causes the traffic jams that you all get stuck in for hours and hours while driving around LA? And feel free to use chat or, speak up. But look at how many cars we have in LA. And that was the first thing when I moved to LA. That was the very first thing that I noticed. And I was like, oh my God, everybody in this city has their own personal car. And it was something that I was just not completely used to. So yeah, cars are good. You can get around. You can drive around easily. You can um, yeah, turn on your radio and listen to your favorite music station. But the con is that you get stuck in traffic, and the worst part of it is that you, while being stuck in that traffic, are causing air pollution. Have you ever seen that black smoke coming out of your car tailpipe? That's the pollution that's being caused just by you driving around. And they're expensive to maintain. So the other alternate way in which we can get around is using mass transit systems. How fun it is to ride on a train or ride on a bus with your friends. I want to see like how many of you opt to ride on a bus or a train instead of riding in a car. Have you tell me some fun experiences that you may have while riding in with your friends or together in a train if you go somewhere, to maybe a different city. It's so fascinating because the first thing that I realized when I started taking the train to LA instead of driving in my car is that I could just, like, for that 1.5 hour, I could just sleep on the bus instead of paying attention to the car. Now I know most of you are not driving right now, but that's, for me, that was a major plus. But it's also a big plus because when we are all riding together in a bus or a train, we are all collectively causing less pollution. And the pollution that we're causing in while riding in our cars not just is harmful to us, but it's harmful to the communities in which we drive around. Living next to a freeway is a nightmare for most people because you tend to get that black soot inside your home. There's always dust. It can cause asthma. And so if you absolutely do have to ride in a try carpooling. Carpooling is a good option because then you are not riding two separate cars, but you're all, riding together in one car and collectively causing less pollution. The other great thing about riding a car is they do reduce pollution, but they also sometimes have their own lane. So you can, instead of sitting around in traffic for an hour, you can actually get to your destination much faster because you have your own dedicated lane, and that's so awesome. The one thing that you may be hesitant about, especially as we are, coming out of the COVID situation, is that you may be exposed to more germs when you're riding in the bus or a train with other people. But there are ways to get around that. You can, right now, you definitely have to wear a mask when you're riding, but in other instances also, you can continue to wear a mask, or like, when you get home, you can wash your hands, and that takes care of that problem. The best part about trains that I think is you can have a cross-country train ride at night. You can look at the city during the night or the day and pay attention to the visuals outside, pay attention to the nature and the scenery outside, rather than just focusing your attention on the road in front of you. And the trains also have their own dedicated tracks, so that's also cool. You can reach your destination much faster too. And as much as I like all of the road trips, try doing these train trips with your friends. And the next time you have an option to do a road trip and just ride in your car, or take a train to your destination, ask your parents to take you on that train ride and see how fun that could be. Tell them how beneficial it is to the environment and how you will end up saving so much the carbon dioxide that you will spout out in the air if you were to drive in your car. And one of the other bad things about the transportation system that we've built is that we are encroaching upon our natural environment. So think of how much land is required to build these freeways. Think of how much land is required to build all of the roads that you have. And now think how awesome it would be if we could use all of that space to build these natural habitats for wildlife or plant trees. And you can just take a walk in those, neighborhoods and those natural environments. Sometimes when you have roads in the remote areas, which are also which also is habited by other animals, you can cause them to lose their homes, and that's not nice. And at times, like, you may hit those animals as well while driving at higher speeds. So there is a major case to be made for us to move away from cars and move to systems in which we can take less space, the less land that we have, and then all ride together. We can save on the pollution, we can save on the natural habitat loss, and we can also save animals from them losing their homes. The one alternate solution that we are now seeing, if you absolutely do have to ride or drive your car, is to move to more alternate vehicle friendly options. So that would mean riding in a hybrid vehicle, which uses not just gas, but also electricity, or doing an all electric vehicle. Curious if some of you have all electric vehicles or have ridden in all electric vehicles. It's so fun because first, there is no noise pollution. Then you don't have any air pollution, which is the best part, because you are not harming yourself. You are also taking care of your community around you. So you are doing something beneficial for the environment, even if you are riding a car. And then solar panels or solar vehicles. Imagine your car having a giant solar panel, or not a giant, maybe a small solar panel. In the future, maybe we'll have cars that have all solar panels on top, so you don't have to charge them at night. As you're riding them, it's getting charged with sun power, and imagine how cool that is. So there are like innovative technologies that are coming in the market, but I would encourage you all that when you do have an option between choosing to drive in a car or taking a bus or a train or walking, great to get to your destination, gives you great exercise. You can chat with your friends while walking, or biking, another great way to exercise and get to your destination. Choose that option instead of just sitting in a car and riding your car. Anything you wanted to add on that, Ryan? Any fun experiences of you riding in trains with your kid?
I think in general, right? I mean, one of the things when I moved to Los Angeles, I mean, it's such a car-centric town, but, finding any way you can to not have to drive, right? I mean, there are, I bike a lot. I try to walk to the store when I can. I mean, just trying to really come up with alternatives, like you said, to not have to drive. But then when you do have to drive, I mean, one of the most impactful things you can do is just to not burn those fossil fuels. So, having the hybrid vehicles, or even if you're using an electric car, right? That electricity is more and more coming from renewable sources, solar energy, wind power. So, again, I mean, you can still drive and make a much less meaningful impact on the environment just by making smarter decisions about what you're driving, right? Or even using electric scooters or electric bikes, right, to go further distances. There's a lot of alternatives out there, and it's important to keep continuing to think about those as you're making decisions in your daily life.
Yeah, and the next time, if your parents are thinking of buying another vehicle, encourage them to buy an EV vehicle. And it's not just that they will save our environment, they will also save a lot of money, because the city of LA, the federal government, you can get a lot of incentives. You can get money back just by buying a car, which is better for the environment. So how cool is that? So ask them to look into that. And if they are looking to buy another vehicle, ask them just move to a hybrid or an electric vehicle. Okay, so all of the stuff the fun stuff that you've learned about sustainability and how you can contribute to creating less pollution, how do you tie it all back to your school? So when you do eventually go back to your school, this is really important, because ultimately we as designers and engineers, we are designing our buildings for the people that inhabit those buildings, the building occupants, you guys who are going to be studying in that building, who are going to be making all of your creative drawings in that building. So how can you incorporate all of the lessons that you've learned to now inform your teachers, or engage in conversations with your teachers on how you can incorporate those technologies in your school, and make your school more sustainable, more green? So one of the ways that we talked about to generate energy is by using solar photovoltaics. So you could have your school put solar panels on top, so that you don't have to produce energy by using the grid. You can use this free energy from the sun to produce all that electricity that you need. Another fun way is for when you do have windows in your school, like roll those blinds, let the daylight flood in, so that you can have this natural daylight, and you don't have to open up or turn on your lights during the day. Same for when you need cooling. If the weather is nice outside, which is most days in LA, open your windows. Ask your teachers to turn off the AC. Maybe take off your jacket if you're feeling a little uncomfortable. Make those choices for yourself so that you can be comfortable in the building while also consuming less energy. Another way that is shown here on the drawing to get more daylight, if you don't have windows, is you can have these skylights or daylight tubes that can give you natural light inside your building. So look for that. Maybe when you go back to your school, check out if you do have skylines. If you don't, ask your teacher, why not? And if there are renovations happening, ask them to incorporate all of these features. So ultimately, our goal is to get to that net zero building. So a net zero building is an energy efficient building that produces more energy than it uses. So when you are in that building, you are not harming the environment. You are just using all of the energy that is being produced by the building itself. And that is such an awesome way for you to contribute to sustainability. So on this slide, it just culminates all of the things that we have been talking about. You have the EV chargers, you have the solar panels, you have the commuting through bikes, recycling your waste, having a green roof, and then also collecting the water that falls on your building roof, or when you have rainfall. So these are some of the ways that we encourage you all to make your life a little more sustainable. And if you have other ways, I would love to hear about them. Chatter to us. If you have any questions on any of this content, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to engage with you in these conversations. And Dave put up an interesting point in chat. So we talked about electric cars, but electric school buses. Ask your school if they can get electric school buses, because then you are riding in together with your friends in that bus, and you are not causing any air pollution. That is going to be so amazing. So, and that's the future. So ask your school if your school can procure some of those buses as you go back to school after COVID. Thank you, Dave. All right, we are right on time. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Ryan, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to throw one thing here at the end. I mean, I think we've done a really good job. You did a great job talking about all of the systems. And look, you're a designer. I'm an engineer. I mean, we can do things like put solar panels on your school and put in efficient glass that are ultimately going to help reduce the footprint that it takes to use the building. But everybody who's in that school, every student who's on this call today can make a decision every day to save energy. You can turn your lights off. Recycling programs only work if you're actually putting things in the recycle bin, right? So, part of it is the design and the upfront part, but everybody on this call is making decisions every day that can help make a more sustainable future. And, really want to encourage everybody to take that to heart and make better decisions every single day, and will get us to where we need to be for that efficient, waste-free future you were talking about earlier, and kind of that net zero. I mean, if we're using less energy, so we are making decisions every day that impact that, and want to make sure that everybody's thinking about that and it's thoughtful, as we leave this session here. So, really appreciate everybody's time today. Kanika, great job. It's been a lot of fun doing this with you. And really excited to kind of see what everybody is going to do when they go home with this information.
Awesome. All right, everyone, enjoy your weekend. Have a happy, healthy, sustainable life.
Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.
Bye.